Well, hello and good morning, everybody. Thank you for being with me. As you're opening your Bible to Acts chapter 17 for today's devotion, just want to remind everyone that a week from now, next Friday and Saturday, October 10 and 11, is our apologetics conference that we host in partnership with Southern Evangelical Seminary. Elisa Childers, Corey Miller, other great speakers are going to be here. And if you haven't registered, do so now. There's also an online registration that's available, so you can watch the plenary sessions, not the breakouts, but the large group plenary sessions via live stream as well. So check that out. Just Google SES Apologetics Conference and you will find it. Also, just so glad we get to host that every year. Also, will remind you that in the lobby of our church, every Sunday is our resource or equipping center. And as I mentioned a couple of days ago, we have gospel tracts there like this, many others. So stop by Sunday and pick up some gospel tracts you can use to witness to people. Well, today, as I mentioned, we're in Acts chapter 17, and this is the record of the Apostle Paul and his team visiting three different cities in Macedonia and in Greece where they preached and started churches. They, for instance, are in Thessalonica, then Berea, and finally Athens. And then the next chapter we'll look at the following day, they make their way to Corinth, which is not far from Athens. But anyway, before I get to the devotion, just two or three brief explanations or teaching notes. One in verse 2 of chapter 17, in the middle of the verse, it says, they came to Thessalonica where there was that's the end of verse 1, actually, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And then in verse 2, according to Paul's custom, he went to them 3 Sabbaths. What that's saying is Paul's missionary strategy was that when he went to a new city, he first found a Jewish synagogue, and he would go there to worship and to preach Jesus, because Jews lived not just in Judea, but they lived in other major cities in that part of the world, in Turkey, Greece, Italy, northern Africa, over Mesopotamia, and so on. And so when Paul would go to these cities, he had a built-in audience. He would go to the synagogue and he would take the Old Testament scriptures and show them that the Messiah had to suffer and be raised from the dead and that Jesus was the Messiah. And his first converts, usually in a city, were either Jews who became believers in Jesus. Today we call them Messianic Jews, or God-fearers, Gentiles or Greeks, who did not convert to Judaism necessarily, but they worshiped the God of the Jewish people. And that's usually where he got his start. So that's what it's talking about when it says, as was his custom. Now in verse 9, there's a riot, if you will, and some Christians are being persecuted there in Thessalonica. And it says in verse 9, when they had received a pledge from them, from Jason and the others, they released them, or a lot of Bibles translate that, when they received not a pledge, but a security, or they posted bond. Now, what was that security? What was that bond? We don't really know. But the Greek word literally means to satisfy. So they did something that satisfied the government officials who were holding these Christians. It wasn't Paul and Silas, it was these Christians, Jason and others, and whether they paid a sum of money like paying a bond, or they promised to ask Paul and Silas to leave Thessalonica and go somewhere else, or they just were able through evidence to persuade them that satisfy them that they were not a threat to the Roman Empire and all of that. We don't know, but however they did it, they satisfied those who had arrested them, and they were released. So that's what's going on there. And then the final teaching notes down in verse 19, the Apostle Paul has made his way to the city of Athens, very famous city. And in verse 19, and they took him this and brought him. This is the Apostle Paul. Some people, he was in the marketplace, very public place in ancient cities, and they talking about Jesus, and they took him. They not by arrest, but they just escorted him over to the Areopagus, or which is also known as Mars Hill. And Areopagus or Mars Hill is a specific location. You can still visit it today in Athens, elevated area around rocks and so on, where before the time of the Apostle Paul was where the court would meet, the Supreme Court there in Athens would meet. But in Paul's day, it was a place where the intellectuals liked to gather and debate philosophy and religion and a lot of different things. So Paul goes where these philosophers and educated people are debating things, and they've been hearing him, and they want to hear from him. And he goes over and he presents his sermon. Now, for my devotion, I just want to say I love Paul's sermon there at the Mars Hill at Areopagus in Athens. It is so profound. It is so logical. It is so clear. Don't want to review the whole sermon, but I would like to point out one thing about it. In verses 24 and 25, here's part of his sermon. He said, "The God who made the world and all things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands." God doesn't live in a building. Verse 25, "Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things." Paul is saying that God doesn't need anything from us. He is self-existent. All existence depends on him. He is self-sufficient. We are not. We need others. We need stuff to survive. God doesn't. He is self-sufficient. So Paul is saying to these people, God doesn't live in buildings. He doesn't need you to feed him, to bathe him, do anything, because God is self-existent, existed before you and apart from you. Our existence depends on God. He gives us breath, life, and everything we have. We do not exist on our own. We exist dependent on God. Even people who don't believe in God would have no existence if it wasn't for God giving them existence. But God is self-existent, and God is self-sufficient. I'm not, you are not, no one is self-sufficient. We depend on the creation, on this physical universe and planet to survive. God does not, because he predates all of it. He created all of it. So God is self-sufficient, self-existent. And then in verse 29, he says, "Being then children of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and thought of man." Ancient peoples created all these idols that they worshiped, many thinking that idol was a god or the idol represented a god, and made of stone and gold and other materials created by a person. And Paul says this eternal, self-existent, self-sufficient of God is not created by anybody, like y'all create all these idols. Now listen, today, here in the West, in America, we don't create idols. Hindus will have idols in their house as an example, but mostly people don't create idols. They don't think they can build something, no matter what the material is, and think, well, that's a god. No. But you know what we do? What we do in the West, what people in America do? They don't create an idol and worship it, but they do create a mental, intellectual idol that they worship. They create a mental image, an intellectual idea of what God is, what God is like. They create their own version of Jesus, create their own version of God. And just like people were silly to worship an idol of stone or gold they made, it is silly for people to worship a God who is a figment of their imagination because they created that God to be like they wanted that God to be, who always agrees with them. So whether it is a physical idol or a mental idol, both are false and evil. You don't get to say, well, I believe or I think, and create God the way you want God to be, because any God you create with your hands or with your mind is a phony. He's not real. Because the true God, the real God, the only God, is the eternal, self-existent, self-sufficient God that you had no hand in forming, because he formed you. And that's the message for today. I'll see you tomorrow as we wrap up this week and look at Acts chapter 18. And remember, register for the Apologetics Conference and stop by the Equipping Center in the lobby on Sunday as well. God bless you. Have a good day.